What's going on, everybody? This is Moose, Brian, and Jake for Emergency Breakdown. We are going to be talking about some MMA late swap that DraftKings started. It sucks, but hey, we're here. We're going to be here for as long as you all need us. We're going to be breaking it down, our initial thoughts, how it screws you. If you don't think it's going to screw you, it probably will. But we're going to be talking about it, ranting, talking about it, and, just having a good old time. So I'm Moose at CFB_Moose on Twitter is where you can find me. Co-founder and data guru here at OccupyFantasy.com. At the top of your screen, Brian at BrianJesterFF on Twitter is where you can find him. He's co-founder and CEO of Occupy Fantasy. How's it going, Brian?
What's good, Moose? Yeah, normally we do these Tuesday night time slots for the $1 Million Mission, and honestly, this, despite the reason we're meeting, it's a welcome break from the weekly memorials of my bankroll from NFL. So, despite not liking this decision by DraftKings, I am happy to talk about something else this week.
Definitely. And at the bottom right of your screen, we have Jake, owner of MMA DFS.com and the writer of the UFC Daily Plug at DFS_MMA on Twitter is where you can find him. What's up, Jake?
What's up, man? Yeah, we're here.
Yeah, so let's jump right into it. We saw on Discord, our social media guy said, hey guys, this sucks, and talked about DraftKings having late swap. So we're going to be here for quite a while. We have a pretty big agenda that we're going to be talking about. If you guys have questions, comments, concerns, you want to rant, you want to say hello, any of those, we do have the chat feature as well. If you're watching this on replay and you have questions or anything, you can go ahead and comment down below. We'll be sure as hell to get back to you. But let's kick it off, Brian. So basically, what is the change? Why is DraftKings changing it so out of the blue, and just go from there?
Yeah, so for those of you who might have saw this on Twitter, you haven't heard about it, this is the first time you're hearing about it. Basically, over the past couple of years, there have been a couple times, maybe once every few months, that a fight has been canceled in UFC after lock. And UFC DFS has never had late swap. The fights start at 6, you put your lineups in, you sit back, you watch the rest of the fights, and you sweat it out. Couldn't change anything. People were upset. Many people were upset about the fact that if a guy gets ruled out 7 o'clock after the fights start, now you have a big 0 in your lineup. You literally can't win, basically, with a 0 in your lineup in UFC DFS. And people were upset that they couldn't change it, right? And so, Jake, despite how little or how infrequently this happens, DraftKings needed to solve it because of how many complaints they got about it. Surveys were sent out to people. A lot of top players discussed it. We saw a lot of people discuss it on Twitter. And despite all of the options, Jake, this is what they came up with.
Yeah, man, I think it's a pretty terrible solution. I mean, it's literally something that affects, 2 or 3 slates a year, and we're going to change, however 43 or however many slates we have a year because of the 2 or 3. It seems crazy. But this is what they did. So, maybe they'll change it back. Who knows? But for now, this is what we have.
Yeah, I would say just if you don't like the decision, contact DraftKings, right? It's just, it's the equivalent of writing to your representative. Will they actually do something? Probably not. But at least you have that option. I know I've been talking to my host. A lot of top players have been talking to their host and DraftKings VIP and even the regular support. So, if enough people complain, enough people, don't play the contest, there's a potential that they change it back. We've seen, I remember, was it USFL Moose? They rolled out the first format, or maybe I think it was XFL, and everyone's like, this is the worst format I've ever seen, and they literally changed it in like 2 hours. So yeah. there is precedent for them rolling back their decisions. But if you're watching this and you normally watch this for football videos, or you're nosy, you're tuning in, really, this is important because if you play MMA DFS, it's going to affect you, and we'll talk about that here as how it affects everyone, even if you don't late swap. And if you don't play MMA, you play other DFS sports, or you're just interested in game theory, a lot of the strategies we talk about here apply to other areas, other sports, other things. So, even if you don't play MMA DFS, I think you'll take something away from this conversation.
Absolutely, yeah. So Jake, to reiterate what Brian's saying, why is it so important? Even if you don't play MMA DFS, why is this late swap change so important?
Yeah, I mean, in general, I think people should be aware of late swap and what people are doing with it and the advantages that can be had. Just seeing what's out there, seeing what other people, what possible combinations they can have based on salary and being able to make adjustments. I mean, obviously, there's lots of sports with late swap. Um, and I mean, I'm not a big NBA DFS guy. I mean, obviously, like that's a sport where you have a ton of different start times. I think with NFL it's a little bit different because you only have two start times. MMA, we're gonna have, anywhere from like 11 to 14 different start times, where there's gonna be at each one of those intervals, there's going to be a decision to be made. So, I mean, I think it's really just a completely different world than NFL if people are comparing those two things in terms of late swap.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, Brian, the biggest thing that, we've talked about this before, but especially for casuals, it's especially on like the East Coast, sometimes fights don't get over with till 12, 1 a.m. Will people really want to, as a casual, be up till 1 in the morning, potentially crunching numbers to late swap the final fight?
I mean, that's the other. I didn't even think about that, right? Like most people just have lives on Saturday nights, and they don't want to, or just like if you enjoy the fights themselves, or you enjoy the actual sweat of MMA DFS. We've all long said that MMA DFS is one of the greatest sweats in DFS. If you enjoy those aspects of it, this new edition completely erases that. So that sucks. But I didn't even think about that, most right? Like some of these pay-per-view cards, they don't get over till 1, 2 in the morning sometimes. Like, do you really want to be making significant financial decisions when you can barely keep your eyes open, right? Because you're at a disadvantage if you don't. So it sucks for a variety of reasons. The biggest thing, like for every single person, it sucks because the sport itself and the sweat itself is now ruined because, right? Because now you have to pay attention. Even us who are on the computer for every single fight, we're not actively making decisions, but now we have to be, right? And then it just sucks because I think that there's 3 ways it sucks. It sucks because of that, the time constraint. 2, it sucks for casual players who are like, I'm just not going to late swap. And we know what happens in every single other sport, right? There are people, and we'll talk about this, who are going to be late swapping all of their lineups. They're going to be making decisions with information that they have that you're not using that automatically puts them at an advantage. And 3, Jake, all the success we've had, just selfishly, like, you don't want to see a change to a process that you've already found a proven profitable success.
Yep.
Pretty much, yeah. And I mean, just back to the casual spot. Sometimes, and when my fiance are hanging out and we actually have lives on Saturday, I know I can go, say if I have the 5th fight of the night and the championship fight left. Okay, I know my 5th fighter goes off, and I'll tell my significant other, hey, let's pound a few beers, let's do whatever we normally do on a Saturday night, and then we can come back to the championship, and I'll tell her, I need this guy to win. Now it's just like, do I really want to tell her, maybe we have to cut back? You can do whatever you need to do, but I have to stay glued to the computer for my $25 single entry solo bullet.
Right. Like, it's just, I mean, that part sucks. Like, yeah, because the best part now is, okay, I have 4 fighters that have won. They're all 100+ point scorers. I have these 2 fighters left. If they win, I'm in contention for 6 figures or a small field win or whatever prizes you're playing for, right? And now you have to actively make decisions to either keep that or change it or fix it. So it's from that perspective, because it sucks.
Yeah, absolutely. And as I think the biggest thing, Brian, you kind of hinted to, is for people who are winning, they're doing something right. So any change to anything is going to potentially hinder that profitability. So
yeah, that part sucks.
Yeah. We got some people in the chat here. We got Perv Dean. What's up, Perv? He says, looking forward to the show. Casual player, so I'm looking to see how this screws me. Yep. Mabaran says, difficult to MME unless you have tools built out for it at this point. It won't get bad as NBA yet, but it's bad. Brian, you and I were talking, and I basically said, whoever can build the best tools in 3 days is going to absolutely crush this first slate, theoretically.
Yeah, in theory, right? And I will preface this by saying that we don't know everything right now. We may make mistakes in anticipating what is going to happen. We may over or underestimate the amount of people that are using this. We may over or underestimate the amount of people that would do this properly, right? So there's a lot of unknowns here. We're laying it all out. And again, we're not big simulation guys. We're not big math-heavy guys. We're great at game theory, but we're not the best game theory players on the planet. So like, there are going to be things that we miss in this entire conversation, and we understand that. So if there's something that we miss, you think we're wrong, throw it in the chat, right? Let us know. But I've already talked to 2 people who play DFS using high-level simulations. They're successful DFS players. They run high-level simulations. Both of them have already said that this week they will be making tools to account for these changes. Both of them said that while the execution might be difficult, the tool creation part will not take them by Friday. They'll have those done in a day or two, even a couple hours, one of them said. So tools are going to be made and they will be ready by Saturday. Is just that, again, the big issue that we've all had with simulations is, do people use them properly? And we see people use them properly all the time. But Jake, as a casual player watching this, they may think, well, how's this going to affect me? We have these type of people. And what was the phrase in our Discord, Jake, about harvesting casual souls or some shit, right? Like they're out to find even more ways to take casual money.
Yeah, something about harvesting casuals equity or something. It's like, oh my God, that's a scary thought, but it's so true. I mean, because you're taking away the experience. That's one thing. We have a lot of questions about the edge that's going to be gained or lost, but one question that we don't have is the experience is 100% changing. I mean, that's just a fact. You can't, it used to be your lineups locked and you could sit back and watch the fights. And if you wanted to do some advanced tracking to see where you stacked up, you could, but you didn't have to. I mean, you could just hang out with friends, drink a beer, and watch the fights and track your lineups, but not have to change your lineups. So, I mean, that's the one thing we know for sure. But yeah, I mean, it's going to be tough for casuals. Maybe people will think if they're only doing one lineup, they'll be able to outdo people doing 150 that aren't simulation people, which I don't know. Maybe that's true early on. You'll have a little bit more control. It's going to be easier to edit one lineup than 150, but the 150 you're going to be able to basically do a lot of hedging that you won't be able to do with one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Jake, I know you and I do a lot of tracking as well, where sometimes every slate, we'll see, how many people are duped with our lineup. What is the ownership for the entire card? And, we kind of go with, what do we think is going to happen? What do we need to root for tonight? Is there anything that stuck out? Now we're not going to be able to do that until literally the next day. So it definitely sucks from that standpoint.
Yeah, I mean, being able to lock ownership used to be great, man. Like, as soon as it locked, you'd be like, okay, now we know who we're rooting for. We're rooting for these guys, and that's gone now.
Definitely. Intrust Games brings a really good point here. He said, this is a mistake. There will 100% be times when they don't lock a fight on time, and people will late swap to the winner. Having a captain full slate was the only thing I thought that could have been added. I mean, to that extent, I'm looking at the DraftKings slate here, and Brian, you and I were talking about it in the Discord, where the final fight on DraftKings, the start time technically this Saturday is 5:20. There is no way that's going to happen. So I don't know if they're going to be like having someone at DraftKings manually like checking in their system when a fight goes live or something, but I mean that just seems like a recipe for disaster, potentially having something like that.
It does. The rules say something about adjusting the start times as needed based on the feed that they have. But what does start mean? Does that mean the first fighter walks out from the tunnel? Does that mean both fighters are in the ring? Does that mean they say fight and the clock starts? Like, what does start mean? Because every second's going to matter when you're late swapping all these lineups after every single fight. And again, that's something we don't know for sure. And I agree with Intrust that there's a 100% chance this is fucked up at some point. Like the refunds will be I would not be shocked if it was this weekend that there are refunds needed to be given.
Because Jake, there's been, you said this happens once or twice a year. There has been instances where either like after lock, and maybe at lock they say, oh, the fight 5 fights from now gets canceled. But there's also been times when they're walking out and it's been canceled at that point. So is that considered a start? I mean, because Jake, you said there has been a couple instances like that, right, where it's been like very, very close to the start time of the fight.
Yeah, man, absolutely. Like my expectation here is that they're gonna lock it when the people start walking out. So we've had at least 2 that I could think of. Chaz Skelly, when he was fighting Jamal Emmers. Jamal Emmers had back spasms after Chaz Skelly was already in the octagon waiting for him. Fight gets canceled. And then we had the Kevin Holland, Trevin Giles fight where Trevin Giles fainted as he was getting ready to walk out. So is that fight already locked? I mean, are those 2 instances not even going to be solved by this terrible solution? Which, I mean, what's the point then?
That's like a quarter of the instances, by the way, right? This happens like twice a year, and you just named 2 of like the 8 of all time that it's happened. So like this solution definitely creates more problems than it solves. I understand the intention, right? And you see the people on Twitter, you see people on Reddit, they're very excited because the losses stick in their minds, right? And we totally understand that. Uh, but this is, I mean, this slow bleeds them out more than just the one hit and done when a fight gets canceled.
Definitely. As Eric points out, were you want to say something, Jake?
No, I was just agreeing. Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. As Eric points out here, it says between the start times and the live score lagging, this is going to be a mess. Jake, I could absolutely see someone having the tools where maybe they have a feed faster than DraftKings, or a feed, maybe they go to ESPN and calculate it themselves or something, and gives them an extra 2 minutes, because there's only a handful of minutes between fights. If it's an early finish, maybe they throw a commercial in between, but goes to decision, scores lagging, and you as a casual is trying to see your lineup. Okay, well, is this even final? There's no like actual final indicator on DraftKings, and yet you have someone with an outside feed that's more accurate more quickly than DraftKings. They have 2 to 5 minute advantage ahead of you. I don't like that at all.
Right. I mean, that's just another edge for people that have tools that, the casual people aren't. So it's just totally alienating the casuals that wanted this rule change, that don't understand the consequences.
Definitely.
Yeah, and you think about it, right? Like, again, there is that lag. There's a 5, sometimes even 10, because there are some slates where it's like, oh wow, UFC stats is on point tonight, right? And they're updating quickly. Some it's like, well, they're lagging tonight, and you might get it might be 10 minutes after a round ends that you get the finalized scoring. And like you guys said, that's every second matters. And for people who can automate all these ideas, they're going to be able to do it so much quicker. Where like 2 minutes, there might be times where you have to make a late swap decision in 2 minutes, right? And as for someone who is hand building, doesn't have those tools, 2 minutes is not a lot of time. 2 minutes is an infinite amount of time when you're running simulations and coding. So that's a big challenge as well. But like you said, Moose, I mean, for anyone out there who's watching this, who has produced content, for anyone who is in Discords, you've seen this question at least every week. They only scored X amount of points. Is that final? You don't actually know it's final unless you're degening like us and you're checking UFC stats. You're checking ESPN. You're watching the fights. And oh, those 2 takedowns were in the first 2 rounds. They still haven't scored round 3. So for the casual player just watching on the app, they have no idea if that score is final or not.
Yeah, and something that actually just kind of came to my mind talking about, I think Jake mentioned with NBA late swap, where at least with NBA late swap, let's say if LeBron's ruled out, you can go back to historical data, and there's other people on that team. People get a boost. You can kind of figure out what you need based off that individualness, not necessarily what's around you. You can also do that as well. But if a fight gets canceled, since every fight is independent, or if you need a late swap to something else, you don't necessarily know offhand what you need. So as opposed to saying LeBron's out, let's play Russell Westbrook or whoever else. If the fight gets canceled, you're like, okay, I don't even know what to do. Or if the scores, I was referring to the scores, like if a machine's going to automatically know what it needs to do, whereas you're going to have to manually calculate or figure something out. I don't know.
If not flat out guess, right? Yes. Like if you're not simming, like let's just say you're playing the big GPP. There are 3 fights left. You have 1 spot left, and you're in your 400th place. You scroll through, you see a bunch of lineups above you with 1 fighter left. It's like, do I swap? Do I not swap? The time is going to expire by the time you decide on what you need to do. Whereas the Sims have that information in a minute max, right? So yeah. It's tough.
I have a question for you, Brian, here from Mbarian. Says, have my head wrapped around gaining ownership as slate goes on, but not sure if it's an advantage to weigh early fighters more now, or even early long shots specifically.
Really good question. And it's something we were just joking about beforehand. It's like, yes, the simulation tools folks know what to do or have an idea of how to late swap effectively, but the edge for early fighters doesn't change, right? They're not going to know to play 40% of this one fighter early because of the work we've done, because of our predictive metrics, because of Jake's tape work. It's like, wow, the field is definitely missing this one. So we're still going to have that edge for sure. But Jake, I guess the biggest question I thought of was, you have extremely accurate ownership projections that you provide to Occupy Fantasy, that you provide to your subscribers at MMADFS.com. And obviously that's a big tool. My first thought was, I don't think that edge is going to disappear. That's still going to be big for us because we're going to be able to accurately predict most of the fights. And this goes to the point of how many people do we think are actually even going to late swap? That really the only ownership that's going to be affected are those final few fights. And even then, I think it's only a few percentage points one way or the other based on how people have done and how early fights have done.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, I don't think we're going to see a huge change, but I do think when you see, like, say a Zaitar on the last slate had won at 50% ownership, I think more people would have gone down to a lower owned fighter late in the slate. So that's where we would have seen some changes. And when Frivola wins, then maybe more people go up to the chalk. So I think in general, we can kind of predict the correlation that when a low owned fighter wins early on, we're going to see the chalk go up a few percentage points in the later fights, and vice versa. So I think it's kind of predictable. And I still think ownership projections are going to be huge because you're still going to need to know who's going to be popular for who to swap to and who's going to be low owned. I mean, maybe more so than ever because more people are going to be seeing that I have a 50-way duped lineup. I need someone lower owned. So, I mean, in some sense, maybe ownership will be even more important.
Am I dumb or just like, so that Azaitar Frivola example, for those who didn't play this past slate or don't play MMA DFS, there's two guys fighting each other. Frivola was 10% owned and Azaitar was like 50% owned. Frivola knocked him out and Azaitar scored like 1 point, Frivola scored 100 points. Obviously a massive difference. And you say like, okay, we have this information now, let's start late swapping. But like, shouldn't, if there was no late swap, like pre-lock, shouldn't your Azaitar lineups already have had more lower owned guys in it because you're playing a 50% guy? Like, I don't see how that's going to change much. It's like, oh shit, he actually won, so now let me change the rest of my lineup. It's like, well, you were playing him assuming he would win, so why does your lineup not fit that ownership bucket anyways, right?
I think the only thing about
I think that's a fair point. I was just going to say, I think that's a fair point, but I think when people see the actual number of dupes is when they might have that like moment of realization where they're like, oh, I have a 200-way like dupe right now. Okay, I thought it was going to be 10 ways, you know?
Yeah, true.
But you wouldn't be able to see that because the fights lock until you won't know you're duped until the final couple of fights, potentially.
You just see there's like 3,000 3v3s, right?
Yeah.
Right.
But also it comes into like what Mabaran's saying, that if your ownership projections are off, and let's say you projected him for 40, he comes at 55. Brian, from a game theory perspective, I know Jake's ownership is on point, so we won't have the problem. But what if someone comes in at 20, 25% more or less than what you think of, and the fight goes off, and you're like, oh shit, this dude's not even close to what we thought he was going to be, and he crushes, he wins. Would you potentially, or do you think other pros will be late swapping to potentially lower their number of dupes? Become, if it's significantly less owned than they thought they were going to be, maybe make their lineup a little bit chalkier.
Yeah, I think that's the only way, is if the ownership projection you initially had was completely off, right? And obviously we see that sometimes, no matter how good the ownership projections are. So yeah, I think that's the one instance where it would make sense. You're like, we project this guy for 17%. For whatever reason, he comes in at 6%. That obviously means we can change it a little bit with the rest of our lineup. Again, I personally, the way I play, the way we all play here with uniques and stuff, I really don't think it impacts it too much. But I do understand, and again, I will reiterate that we are not simulation guys, so we know that we could be very wrong in this instance and not be thinking about it properly. But the issue with uniques now is I can create 150 uniques pre-lock, but they may end up being duped even if they aren't duped at the lock, because let's say in Jake's example, there's a 50-way tie with 4 fights left, whatever. Everyone understands, oh shit, everyone here has 8,600 left. We'll start to see people, even though they probably should have done this pre-lock, it doesn't matter because that's not the point here. Oh, let me drop down to this 8,200 guy, or this $7,800 fighter, or this $7,200 fighter to get dupes. And now my lineup that was already unique in that group that had that is going to be duped because people see that. And I think that's the point, Jake, is like, you can predict it all you want, but until people physically see it and they're bad at that pre-lock as they are now, that's when they'll actually get that realization.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Super fun.
Now, what do you think about, like, Brian, I know you play the Thunderdome sometimes. What do you think about in like small field, high dollar contests, or some smaller field GPPs, or maybe even cash games? I mean, how do you think outside of the large GPPs people are going to be late swapping?
So you said outside of largest GPPs, right?
Yeah, so like the Thunderdome, maybe there's some like 100-player contests, or like the big double ups.
Yeah, so this is where it's the most important, obviously, because large GPPs, again, it's still up in the air on what on how many people are going to late swap, how many people will do it correctly, how many people even have the ability to do it, right? But in small field, let's just say you're playing a 10-man, you're playing cash games even more so. You have information that is extremely valuable because you don't need the optimal lineup. In the largest contest, we're hunting for the optimal lineup. You just got to beat however many people you need to beat in those other contests. So Jake, I would say like you should be looking to swap right after the first fight. For the average person who doesn't have these tools, looking to swap after the first fight, depending on the information you have. Let's just say 80% guy goes off, you don't have him. Now you need to do something. Oh, your 30% dog lost. Now you need to do something else, right? You need to hope that the other chalk fails so you're still in contention. That's when you should really be paying attention in these other contests.
Yeah, I think that's where we're going to see the most swapping for sure is smaller stuff where it's really easy to see what other people have, who's been played, where you're at. And you're not just playing for, min cashing or first in a small contest. In big contests, you're either trying to get the optimal, like you said, or you're like, well, hopefully I can still min cash, which I think that'll kind of be a new strategy where everyone's just adjusting to min cash after they get their first loss. But yeah, in small field, totally. I mean, there's a much wider range of winning lineups than in large fields. So way more strategy. It's going to be this chess match of moving pieces around in live time now in small field stuff.
For sure. Real quick, I got a question offline here. Was asking about they don't think that people will have feeds that are faster than DraftKings in regards to live scoring. And yeah, that's true. But what we were discussing, and correct me if I'm wrong, guys, but like Jake, I know you follow and you always say, oh, ESPN took off some strikes. ESPN has live scoring. And while it's not completely accurate like UFC stats in the final DraftKings scoring is, it's close enough, right? So if you're scraping ESPN or pulling ESPN's API, you will have close enough final scoring 5 to 10 minutes earlier than anybody on DraftKings or using the sportsbook or DraftKings UFC stats feed.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they normally run a little bit high and then they pull some off. But dude, if people were really committed, they could track this stuff themselves. I mean, it's not rocket science. A takedown and a strike, I mean, you can come up with a pretty close estimate, yourself. I mean, I do it when I'm tracking fights for, regional scenes. So it's not that hard. I mean, people could do it in live time.
For sure. So yeah, we're not saying people are getting these feeds quicker than DraftKings. Like there are ways to calculate it faster than what DraftKings provides to everyone in the contest.
Yeah, and also I think from like a scalability standpoint, even milliseconds can matter. Where DraftKings has to update all these contests, all these entries, all these tournaments, leaderboards, and if you just need to update your local CSV Excel file, then it's going to be a lot quicker than having to go out, scrape it, do all the stuff that has to get done on a multi-state website. So, yep. Cool beans here. Any other questions in the live chat? Nope. So, Brian, I don't know if we kind of talked about it or not, but like, at what point do you do it? I know we've pretty much hammered on it, but I think I cannot wait to put out some $1 head-to-heads and stay up till 1 o'clock late swapping for $3 victories.
Yeah, so head-to-heads obviously are the most important, but you still have to go through all of them. 50-50s and double-ups is probably the easier choice here. But I think this is where the strategy comes into play. Like, in smaller contests, every piece of information you get, you should be reconsidering. Whatever that means. So after the first fight. Large field GPPs, right, unless you're doing some recalculating and you're trying to re-optimize your live lineups, like, the first thought I had, and I don't even know if this is right or possible, but it's like, okay, let's say the first fight, this is a very generic example. I have 50% of each side.
Okay.
Fighter goes out, gets a round 1 KO, scores 105 points, that's 7K. The other fighter scores 0. Now, like, I don't want, some of my allocations on some fighters to be heavier in that dead 50%. So let me go back and recalculate all the pre-lock exposures I wanted in that 50% live set. And again, that's probably not possible based on salary and stuff, but like maybe that's something I do. I don't know if that's something you should do. Is it? Maybe, I don't know. It's all preference, I guess. But then it's like, okay, then once this fight loses, now I start swapping it to try to min cash if you're running a bunch of simulations and have those tools. Or now it's 5 fights left, 4 fights left in the big GPP. I can see what's around me, see what I need, and maybe start making late swaps there. I don't know, Jake, what are your thoughts on when you should be doing it in different contest types?
I mean, obviously we'll see how the first week goes, but I mean, my first thought is anytime you lose, you immediately go take out all the terrible fighters in your lineups where you have one loss, because your new goal is to min cash once you get a loss. You can't win anymore. I mean, except for like the one time every 2 years a losing dog ends up in the winning lineup when only one dog wins on the slate, but that's not what we're playing for.
Right.
So I think like right off the bat, that seems like an obvious strategy is like, how can I at least cash this lineup? So let me take out like the completely terrible, tournament plays that were only in there with the idea of trying to take down the tournament. So that's like one really tedious, annoying strategy, is now trying to min cash your tournament lineups, which is going to be terrible. And then the other thing is just, trying to constantly like get on and, or more importantly, off of heavily duped lines. So yeah, I mean, you get 4 fights in, you have 4 fighters that all crushed, and you see that, 10,000 other people have them, like, then maybe you start making some adjustments there. But I don't know. I mean, I kind of want to see how this first slate goes before I get too crazy into some of the theories of what we should and shouldn't be doing. But I mean, obviously people are going to be swapping on and off of the optimal lineup. So, I mean, it goes both ways.
Right. And most, we're not going to be able to tell who and how many people are swapping. It's just something we have to guess at. The only like high level estimation we have is looking at NBA, right? You look at when a guy is ruled out during or before lock or after lock, and we see the ownership differences in similar spots. So we know that most people aren't late swapping or optimizing. But again, we don't know what that effect is going to be, and we can't even track it or download CSVs or do any scraping or figure anything like that in this out, because there's no way of knowing that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Lance actually brings up an interesting point here that I never really thought of, is what about the erroneous line moves that happen during the card? So let's say if someone's a minus 150 favorite, and then Drake out of nowhere puts 2 million on the dog, and now the lines flip the other way. Brian, do you think people are going to be, or Jake, I'll let you chime in. Jake, do you think anyone's going to be late swapping based off like late line moves?
I mean, let's just say you were watching the line going into, I don't know, let's say the Derek Minner fight, just throw that one in randomly. I think that would have made a lot of sense if you see a 200-cent line move in the half an hour before a lock to be like, hey, something's going on here. Time to bail on Minner. Yeah, I mean, absolutely, people are going to be watching live lines. We typically don't see those crazy line moves, but I do think that people will probably be making some micro adjustments, because we do see, I would say somewhat significant moves just before a lock when you get some sharp action coming in one way. So I definitely think that's going to be a new strategy, is just watching the line moves. I would say up until, that 30 minutes maybe before lock is, I think we've seen some big ones right around there.
Definitely. Yeah, and I will say, like, we don't respect a lot of moves in general, right? Like, that doesn't generally affect our projections and our exposures. It obviously impacts ownership projections and what we think the field is going to do. But for outrageous moves like that, yes, I think that'll impact some things. But again, like, how many people, basically, unless you're betting every card and like you're the type of person that doesn't bet at the beginning of the week, you're just betting as each fight comes on, you're looking at the lines. Not many people, again, maybe I'm wrong here, are just like monitoring the lines throughout the night if you're playing DFS. I wouldn't think so. But now you have to, and we know pros probably will now too, who are re-simming everything, and we know that most projections are based on the Vegas odds and the prop lines, and so they're going to be recalculating projections with a more updated information than everyone else in the contest who's not late swapping did at the start of the card.
Pretty much hit it on the head there. Let's move on to the next topic, Brian. You're a top, I think you're still top 5 MMA DFS player on the Roto Grinders rankings. So you're profitable. You're a great MMA DFS player. Is there anyone that's going to be sneaking up, or who do you think is going to be the new top dogs in MMA now that all this late swap is happening?
It's just the simulation guys. Those are the ones that we have to worry about the most. Those with those tools, because I don't have the capability to, and I don't do this anyways, not part of my process, to look at every entry in the contest and think about what I need to do, right? Especially post-lock, because I don't play any other sports that require that. But people have those tools, they're going to be able to swap onto lineups that I already have. And that's a problem for my EV in the bigger contests. And for those of you who aren't playing bigger GPPs and you're still not going to, after all this, you're like, I don't need to late swap for whatever reason, right? The people with no lives are going to be beating you, even if they don't have simulations, because they're going to be checking every single contest they're in. And if you're not doing that, you're at a disadvantage, because I saw people on Twitter, right? All the mouth breathers were just like, well, if I pick winners, it doesn't matter, right? They could swap wrong, they could swap right. It's not about if they're gonna swap wrong or right. It's the fact that they now have ability to beat you in a spot where you were probably already 100% to cash. Like Jake, if we're playing a head-to-head, you versus me, and I'm beating you, and we both have Izzy in the final one. Before, I'm 100% chance to win. Now I am not 100% chance to win because you just swapped the prayer, and now you have a whatever 30% chance of beating me. Those add up over the course of time, and for somehow people just don't get that.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think we're going to see a lot more people willing to drop down in salary late in slates. You know, like say you have a 9,200 main event fighter like this week in Sergey Spivak going against 7,000 Derek Lewis. You get to the end, maybe initially going into the slate, you're not leaving $2,200 in salary left over in your builds, but you get to the end and you realize you can't win unless you go down to Lewis. We're going to see a lot more of those salaries with 2,200 left over. So I mean, those are going to be harder to be unique now.
Or even on the min cash slate where you know you have the main event favorite, but you're out of the min cash lineup and you're like, damn, I don't even think I can min cash with the main event favorite. Let me just swap to the dog and save $5,000 because who cares? I'm losing anyway. So
that's
right.
The thing. I'm losing anyways. I could win, or I'm already locked in, but now I could lose, and it goes both ways. If you're not doing it, that's a massive disadvantage.
Definitely. Let's see here. I think that's kind of all the things. Some other questions that we talked about, or some other questions that we received here. I'll ask this one to you, Brian. It says, can I still play large field GPPs as a casual player if I'm just throwing in lineups for fun, hunting for first, and not worrying about min cashing?
Yeah, because I think you can. I think you can for sure because you're hunting for the optimal anyways. Right? The only way it truly hurts you there is, I mean, there are a couple ways it does hurt you, like, but you're getting deep into the weeds of like, this first guy scored 80. What does the optimal lineup look like with this person who scored 80, and building and rebuilding your lineup to fit that outcome? But in general, you're just trying to get the best possible lineup. Now you might be duped more because people are late swapping onto that. That's the big key. If you're playing large field, I think you can certainly still have fun and be okay with playing those lineups. I don't know, Jake, do you feel differently?
No, that actually, I mean, what you just said, actually, I hadn't even really thought about it. That's actually a really good point. Like, if you have an early fighter that they don't lose, but they don't score great, you can start thinking about, like, what do I need to still win this slate with this score that, typically won't get into the winning lineup, but how can it? And you can build lineups around that narrative. I mean, that's just a scary thought that this is the whole new element that we're going to be competing against. It's crazy.
Right, like, because your human mind cannot literally compute that, but simulations can, and that's what, again, for the fifth time, that's the tagline of this episode is that's what we're up against.
You mean, Brian, you don't want to take a lineup that has 7,000 salary remaining and make it have 15,000 salary remaining because that's the only way that it can go.
Yeah, right. Like, I don't know, man. It's a scary thought.
Yeah. Cool. So I want to wrap it back around. We're gonna say one final thing each, and then I'll close it out with this. Again, we talked about at the very beginning of the show. If you don't like this, absolutely complain to DraftKings, at them on Twitter. If you have a host, reach out to your host. But more importantly, if you don't like it, just vote with your dollars. I guarantee, if everyone who didn't like it didn't play MMA this Saturday, it would change it Sunday.
Yeah, and the prize pools will be 10K next week. That's how it changes.
I guess so, yeah. And Jake, do you want to say any last thoughts?
Yeah, man. I mean, I think definitely, like, make your voice heard if you're not a fan, and if you are a fan, go find your edge and I guess figure out how to win. But I mean, this is the new world we're in. So all we can do is complain to DraftKings and then figure out how to beat each other and not have any lives on Saturdays anymore. Thanks, DraftKings.
That's what it comes down to. I'll just say, like, if you're gonna play it seriously, you're gonna have to be around phone, computer, and again, we can beat simulation, folks. But you're still have to be flexible and be around. If you're playing, especially smaller contests, you're gonna have to be able to swap. It's necessary. It's the equivalent of playing NBA DFS and not slate swapping. You're totally dead if you're not doing it in smaller contests. So I'll just close out and say that we found massive edges in this sport and other sports. We'll continue to look as hard as we can and try to come up with theories for this new frontier of MMA DFS. But I'll echo what Jake and Moose said. Just if you don't like it, let them know, and maybe we'll bully them into making the right decision.
And I absolutely hope somehow a fight gets canceled after the start time, and we still
Please fucking happen. Please fucking happen, and it doesn't fix anything. That would just be the greatest thing. And then everyone's just mad, and no one wins.
I know. So awesome. So that'll do it. So Moose, Brian, and Jake from Occupy Fantasy and MMA DFS.com. Until next time, we'll all have a good night and good luck, everyone. See you later.